Stories like crazy, because everyone has mental health, and everyone has a story, and sometimes they're crazy. Join Lori Lane Murphy and me, Adriana Prosser, as we talk about dealing with, struggling with, and managing mental health with storytellers who want to share their true life story. Get in the conversation with us and talk to us on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe on SoundCloud and iTunes. Now, let's smash some stigma. We talked to Dean Young, host, comedian, producer, cat dad, and he made Talkhole, Canada's comedy podcast network. We chatted about breakups, breakup tattoos, depression, the highs and lows of finding yourself after a major breakup. And I just wanted to point out some resources for you. CMHA Toronto has this mental health resources serving Toronto list. I'm going to link to it in the description box, and also that little bubble thing that happens on SoundCloud, just in case you need it. But now, let's listen to Dean's story. Dean, you have a story for us.
I do. So, what happened with me, and a lot of people certainly in the comedy world knew about this, and anybody who sort of follows me on social media, I talk about this a lot at shows we do, like Tinder Tales, where I met Lori originally. Basically, on my Facebook, which is a public Facebook page, you can go back about a year and a half, and I had this big life-changing breakup, right? So I was engaged, I bought a house and all this. That ended, and I famously just was wide open, publicly sad about it. Like, I just had a lot of people in comedy like to call it my meltdown. It was my famous, so just posting stuff on Facebook, just open statuses about this, going on all these radio shows and just talking about, I'm so sad, you know. And that's how I got into doing stuff like Tinder Tales, was because I was going through all of this breakup stuff and, you know, broken engagement and selling a house and all of this. So anyways, I was being very open and very public about all of this. I ended up getting a breakup tattoo, which is also pretty famous in Canadian comedy. I'll describe it actually for the listeners. So it's on, you guys can see it, of course, but it's on my arm. What happened was, when I was being very sad, very publicly sad, this friend of mine who was a comedian, Wojtek Archishevsky, he moved away to Doha because, you know, why wouldn't you?
What is Doha?
In Qatar. Oh. So his wife she's like a freelance journalist, and she got picked up by Al Jazeera out there. So now he like lives in a yacht on the Adriatic right now. So okay, Wojtek. But anyways, when I had all this stuff going on, I had a couch surf around Toronto, staying with friends. There was a period where I was staying at my dad's place. So a ton of material came out of this for me as a comedian. Like, I got like a whole album worth of stuff. But I was doing all this stuff. I was going through the motions in a very public forum, right? Because I think the nature of my job as a comedian and as a radio person, you're kind of an open book, right? Like, everything that happens in your life passes through that filter, so it goes out into the microphone, it goes out on the air, it follows you on stage, it becomes material, right? But I didn't have a lot of separation at the time between what am I just sharing wide open with the public, or what am I turning out in the form of writing or in the form of stand-up material or just talking about openly on the air. So I was doing all this, and my friend Wojtek sent me this quote that said, "A rocky year in the life of a legend is still a year in the life of a legend." And that was and that was his way of just being like, I think basically just being like, hey, remember, you know, you have all this good stuff going on. This isn't you. This isn't your whole life. Isn't just this person that you're parting ways with now. And so he sent me that. So of course I got that tattooed permanently on my arm. You know, a year and a half later, now I'm single. Now I'm going out on dates and stuff like that. And now I have to explain that tattoo every time. It's like, if first dates are always awkward, right? And I always think of it in terms of what it must be like for single parents out there dating, right? So when you broach that topic of like, you know, I have 2 kids, they're this age and this age, like, how do you bring that into the conversation when you're out there on dates and mingling and try to find somebody? My version of that is, so I have this tattoo, and here's what this means, right? Here's what this is all about. So I was doing all this, I was going through the motions, and again, it was, interestingly enough, and I know it's such a cliche, but I think, like many cliches, it's because there's truth in it. It's that whole sad clown thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's like the more difficult of a time a comedian is going through in their personal life, it just makes its way to the stage. Like all of this, I don't think I've ever had such a productive writing period in my life as I did during that time, right? Because everything that was happening to me, I was just churning out in the form of all this new material. I remember one friend of mine in comedy, he was like, I love this whole new going down in flames persona that you're doing. And I'm like, well, that's great, but it's not a persona. This is just my life right now.
That's my life.
Yeah. I didn't invent this. This is just happening in real time, and I'm just trying to figure out how to turn it into something. So yeah, I'm going out on the air, I'm going on stage, I'm talking about all this stuff, and that still happens now, but it's changed over time. And, I got like an album worth of stuff out of this, oddly enough. But I was going through all of this, and it was just one of those years where it seemed like everything that could happen was happening, right? It's like I have this breakup going on, and I really had no idea how to deal with that because it upended everything, right? Because I was like chiseled into that mindset of this is my life with this person, and this is what I know, and this is my home, and I had to go back to before all that stuff. And you really do, I think in situations like that, certainly I did, I think you lose sight of who you are and who you were to begin with. You tend to forget that, okay, I was doing all this, and I was this person before that person ever came into my life, right? You lose sight of yourself because you become so invested in that. So all of that was happening, and I was sort of dealing with it, and other things were happening in life. Like I lost a couple of friends last year. People passed away. Career stuff, which is normal in Canadian showbiz. But all this stuff that seemed like just a nonstop avalanche of terrible things. And famously, everybody had a terrible year in 2016 anyhow, so maybe I wasn't the only one for sure. But all of this stuff was going on. And then it sort of started manifesting itself in this way that I didn't really understand what was happening. Just like this, because I didn't really know anything about depression or, like I knew about, severe forms of depression. I knew people who have taken their own lives from manic depression and chronic depression. But situational depression, I didn't really know what it was or what that should feel like. I just thought, well, I'm just sad or I'm being silly, And the way I would describe it is it's almost like when you have the flu and you get those waves that hit you all of a sudden of nausea, like you're going to be sick, right? So it's just moments like that. No matter what I was out doing, I would just get these moments that would just hit like a ton of bricks out of nowhere. Even if I wasn't dwelling on that stuff, like even after I had already started to deal with that stuff, just these moments of just this severe, heavy sorrow, this sadness that would just hit you out of nowhere and just completely steamroll you, And you couldn't do anything. Like you have no appetite, you're tired, you have no energy, you have no interest in anything. I wouldn't want to, and I still did everything I had to do. I would still go out and do shows and all that, but I wasn't feeling it at all. These moments would come and I was just like, there's no hope at all in the world, nothing at all. And I lived with that for about a year or so, right? And just, I would ride it out basically every single time. Once in a while I would tell my friends, like, I think I might have depression. I think something's going on with me. And then I would sort of revoke that later on. I would be like, you know what? I was just being stupid. I was just being silly. I would sort of write it off and ignore it, right? And it would just keep happening, and it would get worse and worse, and it would come in these waves, and I would just wait it out. I would keep it to myself and then rationalize it, pretend it never happened afterwards, right? So finally it got to a point where I thought, and again, another cliche, but you can't really fix what you ignore, right? And after a while I thought, well, now I'm holding myself hostage in life. I'm dwelling on all this stuff that should be in the past. The other person that was involved in that split up at the time, they long ago, they moved on with their life, as they should. They moved on with their life, found their own happiness, moved on with their career and all that. And I was like, well, why? How come I'm not doing that? And now at this point, no one else is holding me back. I'm denying this for myself, right? I'm holding myself back from all this. So finally, I just sort of took ownership of it, told my friends, told my family, and just said, I think that this manifested itself into this depression. And as soon as I actually sort of took ownership of that and was out in the open with it and actually explained to people what was going on and what was happening when these moments would hit me like that, it changed things so much, because I had unburdened myself of all this stuff. I'm sure I still have my moments, but ever since I came out with that, man, have they ever been fewer and farther in between, just because I finally acknowledged what it was. And I had these close friends that would be like, well, here, I've gone through this, I've gone through that. And it's funny, you find out how many people have actually dealt with this stuff, right? Because there's always that stigma. You always think like, well, am I crazy? Is something wrong with me now? Did I develop some sort of a... And even I told my parents, and they were like, well, hey, when, we've been around, we've been divorced, we had periods like this for sure. What's happening is normal. It's when you don't deal with it, then it can turn into something far worse, right? It becomes a sort of cancer. It'll just grow, and it'll just eat away at you. And there was one funny thing where I was trying to explain it to my younger brother, who still lives back home. I'm in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And at first, his reaction was, cheer up, bud. You think I like working in Winnipeg all the time? That was his reaction to that. And he was supportive enough, but at first that was his knee-jerk, just like, okay, you don't get it. But as soon as I started talking about this stuff, just the act of doing that, and I mean in real life, like, telling jokes about it on stage and all that was one thing because it was part of my job. And that is medicinal, for sure. That is therapeutic. But it was talking about what was going on off stage, behind the scenes, finally, that actually made such a difference in my life. And I think that's why at first, when all this stuff happened, I think that's why I was so willing to talk about it on the air and on stage and in a public forum, because that's what comedians do. And that is therapeutic for sure. Like, I was doing all these roast shows where people were just really brutally using that as material against me, and I was like, but you know what? In a weird way, this is a pat on the back. This is what comedians do for each other. But it was when I actually took it into my personal life and opened up to friends and family and just said, this is what's actually going on. Things started to change almost instantly. And of course, that's not the case with everybody. Everybody has their own forms of mental illness, their own forms of depression, their own root causes of it. But for me, that's what all this stuff stemmed from. And as soon as I stopped ignoring it and pretending it wasn't happening, then things started to change. And that's my story.
I like it. I'm stuck on one thing that you said earlier on, and because we're all about the conversation, otherwise we wouldn't be doing this podcast, is when you started talking about it a little bit and then you revoked it.
Yes.
That's a pretty strong word, and I think that really speaks to a lot of us where we are more hostage by our self-stigma than what anyone out there could ever tell us. So I'm almost picturing you like come here, and then you'd say it and then go, no, never mind, and pull it back.
Yep.
Until, I guess, doing that enough and then thinking about it enough and seeing the damage that you were... I don't want to say the damage that you were doing to yourself, but the lack of acknowledgement, like you said eloquently, it is like a cancer.
Yeah, and you
get sicker and sicker and sicker.
And I think when you do that, you're denying yourself those moments where you can actually fix what's happening. And I did that a lot. I would approach friends of mine and just be like, I'm really depressed, this is happening. And then I would take it back, just be like, you know what, I was just being silly. I was just overthinking it. And I think after enough times of me doing that, they were really starting to pay attention and going, no, this is something. And that's when people started telling me their stories. I'm like, well, I dealt with anxiety and I'm on this medication, or after my divorce this happened, or like I said, even my parents, like I phoned my parents up one day finally, and I was just like, here's what's been going on with me. And it was almost like coming out of the closet in a way or something, right? Like I just felt like, in a weird way, I was like scared to tell them this, and I don't know why now in retrospect. And yeah, both of them were just like, yeah, well, we've lived life, we've been through this stuff for sure. And as soon as more and more people had experiences like that, I thought, wow, this is such a relief. Because I thought that I had taken myself to a place where something was finally wrong with me. And I actually, at one point, this is about a year and a half after this breakup and everything, and I'm finally through that forest now where it doesn't matter to think back on that stuff and everything, aside from the material I got out of it.
And the tattoo.
And now being out there dating. But it got to a point where I emailed that ex one day. Mm-hmm. We hadn't talked in a very long time since we sort of, all of our, the business of the breakup was over, like getting rid of the house and all that stuff. And it got to a point where it was, I don't know if everybody's situation is like this. Every situation is different, obviously, but it went from a place where when we first split up, it was very mutually supportive, like, you know what, we're going to get each other through this. And then it devolves into fighting over stuff. And then it got to a point where we were like arguing over text about like a box of random shit that I left in our old house, like just stuff I didn't need, just because you end up picking at everything. So we hadn't talked in forever. Finally, I emailed her one day, and I was like, you know what, let's just grab coffee. And I heard that she was moving away, so I wanted to sort of bury the hatchet as a way to move on myself. And also, I just didn't want to close that particular chapter in my life on that kind of a note. Like that angry, sad note. I thought if I'm actually going to deal with this stuff and all of the fallout from it, and where this depression came from, then I actually have to wrap that up a bit more cleanly, And it was actually great. I mean, I met up with her and I was like, listen, I was dwelling on all of this stuff. Like, I was like, I've heard about all the things secondhand that are going on with your life. You've moved on. I'm happy for you. Now it's time for me to do that, right? And it was actually great. We had a conversation about this, and I even told her, I was like, I was dwelling on all this stuff for so long and just letting it manifest and manifest. On stage, it was great because it was all coming out there, but it was in my personal life where I was just really living quietly with all of this stuff and holding on to all of this anger and sadness and resentment and all this shit that I just didn't need anymore, that was only hurting myself. So finally, I even kind of came clean to her about that, and it was probably the best conversation we've ever had since the relationship, since back in the day when things were good. And it was actually... It was a huge relief in a way, to just finally let go of this stuff.
So do you think that is a space that you could ever see yourself in again, knowing what you know now about the depression and the episode that you had? Can you see yourself maybe catching it sooner if it were to happen again?
If it were to come up again? Yes. Only because I know that feeling now. Like, it's so weird. Like, and you mentioned Joel West earlier, who's a friend of mine. He did this podcast with you. I remember Joel talking about that before, because Joel's always been wide open about his dealings with depression, and that's a struggle he's had for a long time. And he always has said, depression is a physical thing. And I sort of understood. I was like, okay, well, you probably, you can't eat, you can't sleep and all this. But I finally understood what that meant, where it's that you can feel it in your body. It's so weird. You feel this thing that's about to hit, and you just sort of batten down the hatches and brace for it, right? Because you know it's coming. So I think now that I finally recognize what that is and what that means, and to not let it get any worse, to actually deal with it, for sure. And like I said, as soon as I started actually acknowledging it, then things started to change, because it wasn't this weird
and I think
that was happening.
And that's the gift, right? Is to be able to spot signs that you wouldn't have known a year ago.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. I like when you say it's like the flu, because you certainly wouldn't say to somebody, oh, buck up, it's just the flu.
Exactly.
Have some neocitrin and get on with it. And you wouldn't, and yet it feels very similar that way. I'd love to be able to say to somebody who's suffering emotionally or mentally to just snap out of it.
Yeah.
But it is a physical illness as much as it's a mental illness.
For sure.
And whether it's, and I believe that wholly, and I know Adri can attest to this, whether it's situational or, chemical, you can feel every bit as sick as somebody who's having, a diabetic, going into a diabetic coma. Yeah. It doesn't matter. And I think that that's probably a big part of what people don't understand, but maybe want to understand. I don't know. What do you think?
What do you mean, like, want to understand about, like, the physical part of it?
I think I'm liking, because of all the work, and we have come a long way, I think, in the world of conversation around stigma and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that though there are a lot of people that still don't necessarily get it, I think there are more people that want to get it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That are trying really hard, because the fact of the matter is, unless you've gone through a depressive episode, unless you've had severe anxiety where you're just tearing your hair out, there is no way to explain that to somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's nice to know that people are looking at this as, wow, like, maybe this darn thing is real.
Yeah.
I think that's why the conversations are so important.
And actually understanding that, because, there's, that old thing where people would just be like, well, stop being sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Go for a walk in the sunshine.
Yeah.
Take a scented bubble bath.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Oh, yes.
Lavender everything.
Lavender everything and you'll be fine. Or, and probably in the early days of your breakup, why don't you just get another girlfriend?
Yeah.
Go get laid. You'll be fine. And you want it to be like that.
That easy? Yeah.
Oh my God, who wouldn't want it to be like that? When I go through my manic stage and I'm doing all kinds of things that I'm up here thinking, that's really silly, why don't you just stop? You can't stop.
Yeah.
You're doing it until you don't do it anymore. And so again, I keep coming back to the conversation, the fact that you got to talk to people that are really important in your life. I think you're very brave to share it all on stage, because there is a lot of funny stuff that comes out of mental illness and pain.
Yeah.
And comedians are about pain. I don't know any comedian who is not depressed in some way or another.
Well, and it's kind of funny because when the first, breakup stuff first happened, I don't want to say schadenfreude, but I think a lot of comics were watching me have this sort of meltdown, in a sense, on and off stage. And they were just kind of going like, so the other shoe dropped. Because the year before that, if I was going and headlining a show or something, it was like 40 minutes of, my life is perfect, dream house, la la la. And the rest of the comics were just like, no. Come back into the darkness with us.
No one wants to hear about your happiness.
Yeah, no one wants a happy comic.
No.
So it was, and actually that's an interesting thing that you said too, is these swings. I noticed that last year when I would have, the highs were just as high as the lows, right? So it's like all of a sudden nowhere I could be like on the subway on the way to go do a show or to go to be on the air or something, and it would just out of the blue it would hit and it would be like I'm tearing up on the subway and I have no idea why at all. I wasn't even thinking about anything other than what do I want to do at this show or whatever job I was going to do. So I'd have those moments where it would just hit out of nowhere and I'm like, I'm starting to tear up on the subway for no reason at all. But then there would be other moments where I could be just out walking around in my neighborhood and grab a coffee, simplest thing, and I would be like high as a kite. Like I would be like, I'm the happiest person in the world right now. I have everything. Yeah. So strange. It would just completely arc from one end to the other.
I really believe that speaks to the healing power of the brain. Because with bipolar disorder, that happens without any will. Like, it doesn't... Right? So, and we take care of that. And we take our medication and we do our thing. But I firmly believe you have bipolar-type symptoms without actually having a diagnosis sometimes. Because I think it's... And believe me, and we say right at the beginning, we're not trying to crack the mental health code. We are not psychiatrists.
We're not professionals.
We're not professionals in any way as I say this, but I really think it's the brain's way of trying to right itself.
Absolutely.
Of saying, this poor man, he has suffered enough. Let us pull him up a little bit. We're going to drop him eventually.
Yeah.
But, and I really think that there's... who we are and our personality and our DNA and our brain wants us to be healthy.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And
no,
happy.
for sure.
Yeah. And so I think the highs and the lows happen whether it's anxiety or depression or bipolar or what have you. And I think we have the will to want to be better.
Right.
And that's why these conversations are so important, because it's not about self-pity. And I think that's why people don't talk about mental illness, because you just want attention.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, you just want attention, or you're being dramatic. You know, I don't know about you. I grew up with that one.
I don't know about you. Please. You know about me.
Yes.
I always get the, Adri, you're being dramatic. And
she's a fiery redhead, too. She has her hair back right now.
There are reasons why stop signs are red.
Yeah.
They got it from redheads. Like, it's just the way life needs to be. It's a warning sign. And that stigma of the overshare and the TMI and the, I don't think this is really appropriate right here. And it's like, when is it appropriate? I'm not taking my top off. I'm not like laying you out here. It's really funny because people at work now understand that if they're like, hey, how are you? I will actually tell them how I am.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really funny how some of them have stopped and some of them just say, hi, and then keep walking.
Yeah.
And some of them are actually still brave enough to be like, hey, Adri, how was your weekend? And I'll be like, you know what? It was shitty balls.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, really? And like no longer being like that, like the stylized, this is what you're supposed to do, like very cliche kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Now I can see the ones that are really investing in me and the relationship that we have, even though it's a workplace relationship,
right? And
that they will be like, you know, how are you?
And I actually want to know.
And that's the thing, is like I'm teaching them by responding honestly to own those words, like to have the responsibility for their words. Like if you're going to ask me how I am, if you want a cardboard Hallmark thing, then you say, hi, isn't it nice outside? To which I can reply, yes, I see the sun is shining. You know, like you want some kind of response from me.
Yeah.
And if you want it a certain way, give me a yes or no. Like give me something like that. But if you're going to ask me an open-ended, honest fucking question and say, how are you? Mm-hmm. I'm going to tell you.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah.
And I have to say that it's really fun sometimes, I have to say, to tell people the truth.
Oh, I know.
When they're not quite ready for the truth.
Yeah.
I have a recent example. There are people that I've sort of dropped off the work front for the last couple of months, and I'm going back soon, and hopefully, because I'm doing this program that's very important, and it's at the Ontario Shores I think it's called Mental Health Services of something. It's very dramatic. It's in Whitby.
Yeah.
And it's down by the lake. And there's only two things down by the lake. It is Ontario Shores or the Yacht Club. And I drive there every day, and no one's going to the Yacht Club in February. So when people are like, you're going down to the lake? Where are you going? I'm going to the Nut House. And it's amazing. You will get that beat of, oh, you.
Did she just?
Oh, you.
Oh, but she did. How do I respond?
Well, how do we respond? And the fantastic lesson that I'm learning from this is the people that are in there and are sharing in the sessions that I'm in now, we make horrible jokes about it all the time.
Yeah.
And I think, time and place to a degree, and if I'm standing in front of someone who I'm sort of feeling out is not going to be, down with it.
They're really raw, and they might be really, in it.
Absolutely.
Might not be the time.
But to be able to just take back, hence stories like Crazy.
Yeah.
To be able to say, I spend my day with the crazies, and we're learning stuff, and we're getting our skills back together, and I'm dealing with my meds, and, and I'm still a normal person. Imagine that. Mm-hmm. And what is normal anyway?
Exactly. I mean, I think that's the main thing, right, is when you hear all these people talking about their experiences with depression or anxiety or mental illness, whatever their story might be, you realize that it's so many people because life is fucking messy, right?
Yeah. I think most of us should be medicated.
Yeah.
I mean, truly.
Yeah. There's no such thing as Pleasantville in the real world,
No.
I mean, people live their life, and in a lot of ways, you have those moments too, I think, where it's like, this stuff flavors life in a weird way, right? I mean, this is part of your story and part of your character, and this is where it comes from. Like, everything can't be cut and dry, simple, and happy all the time. You need to have those ups and downs. You need to have those elements of tragedy, and that's life,
Oh my God, Dean, I so love that you just said that it colors your life, because that's the beauty of the gift of mental illness. it can make you really interesting if you let it.
Yeah.
If you don't fight it. Adri's one of the most interesting, and she's batshit crazy. And she is very interesting. But if you allow it to say, like, this is my experience, so you use it to color your comedy, and that's also your truth. We all use it in whatever way makes sense to us, but I think that if you were to... Right now, the statistics in Canada are 1 in 5 people experience mental illness. Okay, everybody has mental health. And that's something people forget.
Yeah.
We all have mental health, dudes. But mental illness, and the gap is closing, it's more like 1 in 3 now.
Yeah.
And those are only the people that are reported.
And that's the thing.
Yeah.
Right? That's just reported stats. So I think that we have every right to create podcasts and conversations like this to talk to our people.
Well, that's the thing, is like, God bless the muses, right? Like the people like us who are willing to take a microphone, get up on stage, schadenfreude for other people. And like when I first did my one woman, I called it Theater Confessionals, because it wasn't necessarily like that it was confessional theater, in a sense that it was therapeutic for me to go through the story. Like I'd love to see your set now, because my one woman show is basically a comedy routine of just how fucked up my life was in that first year of bereavement that my brother died.
Right.
And and the boyfriend that I was trying to marry walked out, cheating and losing the apartment, and I lost everything but my cat. And that's why it's called Everything But the Cat.
You can relate.
Yeah, really.
Right?
Yeah,
I'm listening to you and I'm like, your 2016 was my 2010, baby. But it's all up from there, right?
Yeah.
And for some reason, I felt compelled to get up in front of fucking strangers and tell this story. And it was interesting because, like you said, and then people came to you and wanted to share their story, and it was kind of like a badge of honor, and like how Lori and I have our tattoos, you have your tattoo. Yeah. That you share your tattoos, and you're like, been there, done that, war stories, and it is that community that I didn't know I was going to tap into. I just wanted to get it out there, in so much that I wanted, for whatever cathartic part for what I'm doing, like it was part of my process and whatever, and like there was that selfish part of it. Let's all understand that there is a selfish part of us.
Every person who gets on stage is selfish.
I'm just saying, there are people staring at you and being quiet for you. Like, there's a thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, trying to show this vulnerable truth. And that's why we go to theater, and that's why we watch movies, and that's why, there are compelling people to watch and not compelling people to watch, because, they get up there and they're actually giving a piece of you, themselves to you. And that's why I think it's really compelling to hear people's actual stories, and not like how we're saying that we need to keep the conversation going and whatnot. But I think it's more valuable to know that you went through it and you're saying it, like it's your story. Because we can go and watch Shakespeare and watch these great tragedies and watch these relationships fall apart, and we can clap and we can be distanced. But things like Tinder Tales and storytelling and these shows, I feel like it's something that is necessary in the now, right? Because more people are talking, more people are reporting, and it's that bolstering of community of like, we are out here and we're doing this, we're in the swamp with you, and that they need to hear that it's from the source rather than story like written by,
Or I have a friend who.
Which again, like if you watch The Leftovers, I bawled like a frickin' baby, because it was written in such a wonderfully vulnerable way that like the grief and the bereavement and the loss and the mental illness was depicted so well. But I wiped away my tears and was like, wow, good show. Yeah. Right? And I could go about my day.
That's right.
But when I go and I see the first-person storytelling and things like this podcast, which, I'm not really seeing anywhere else, is this idea of, holy crap, if I wanted to, I could Twitter you, I could email you, I could Google you, and, I could really get in touch with you and continue that conversation with that actual person, with that actual story.
Absolutely. And I think that we are creating, and you said this before last week, but we are creating not geographical safe spaces, we're creating safe spaces within ourselves to have conversations for other people. And that was the same reason I did my one-person show and talking about my dad and growing up with mental illness, and it was hilarious. It was a ride.
Yeah.
But with its painful moments and trying to understand as a kid what that all meant. And Adri's absolutely right. And there's something about listening to a comedian tell their story about a real story that's not a very funny story, but you make it funny.
Yeah.
And it just becomes so real. And we're thinking, if this guy can do this, I can do this. I may not get up on stage and do comedy.
No, but you might get up at the cooler at work and be like, hey, guy.
Yeah. Or the company picnic.
When somebody says, how are you today? And
right.
you'll be like, actually, John, not so good.
Have a seat.
Let's go get a Tootsie Roll, because this is going to take a while.
Exactly.
I don't know why I said Tootsie Roll. Apparently I want a Tootsie Roll. But yes. So thank you. That is awesome. And where do we find all of this stuff about you?
Oh, boy. People can go to talkhole.co. So that's our podcast network, but there's also all of my shows are listed on there and about me and all that stuff.
And we know you have a wide open Facebook page.
I have a wide open Facebook page.
Go back a year and a half.
Scroll back a year and a half. But all my stuff gets posted on Talkhole, and people can find me on Twitter at Comic Dean Young, and even like all the Tinder Tales shows and all my stand-up shows and all that kind of stuff. And that's, it's just real life.
Fantastic.
Just talking about real life, because everybody has been there before, you know.
And before you leave, I'm going to take a picture of your tattoo for our listeners.
Yes, sure.
We'll put it up on the Twitter sphere, because I just feel like
and our Facebook page.
That's amazing. I love that we are all tattoo brethren and sisters.
Yes. Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you want to join the conversation, and we hope you do, come find us on Twitter and Facebook. And you can subscribe to us on iTunes and SoundCloud. That's it, Stigma Fighters. And remember, your story isn't over yet, and we want to hear it.